What is the worst day of my life?
You would think that the loss of my first husband to suicide would be that. But I don't think I was in a place really able to heal or even acknowledge that that was the case because I had two little ones. So honestly, flash forward to October 28th, 2022 is the last time I saw my daughter alive. And I think on that day, and I remember that day, and I remember a car accident that she had been in, and working through all the dynamics of getting her home, making sure she was safe, being so exhausted from the long night. She had just gotten out of rehab just a few days earlier. And then going to bed that night and waking up and seeing the car a mess, but knowing she's upstairs in her bed. She's safe, but I was going to my own counseling appointment. So as I drove to the counseling appointment, I remember calling my husband and asking him to make sure just to check on her, before he left for work, so that we could get everything in order for the car insurance. And so I was in my counseling appointment just like this, but he opened up the Bible and started reading to me from the book of Job. And as he was reading that, he put my name in front of Job instead. And I was like, why would anybody want that? He shuts the Bible, my phone rings, and that's when I learned that my daughter had died in that moment.
Trauma and grief are very closely related. They're not exactly the same thing. But in cases where we hear of overwhelming loss, someone losing a loved one and then another loved one in short succession, you wonder how a human being can survive that severe of a disappointment in their life and that severe of a loss and that great of a trauma, you could say.
Suicide affects families and friends forever. There is a void. People blame themselves. They want to know what they missed. People want to know intimate details. It becomes difficult to, as a family member, how much do you share? How much do you want to hold close?
My first husband, Rich, died December 24th, 2007. It was Christmas Eve of 2007, and he had been in the hospital so many times. The kids didn't know. They just knew that, we were working on some things. He had moved out, and then he moved back in, but he couldn't take more time off from work. And so I always went down to South Florida to see my parents and family. So I went down probably a few days earlier. Let's say it was the 22nd. My mom's birthday was the 23rd, so we were celebrating, and I just felt off that day. I felt like something wasn't right and I couldn't reach him. But I said, it's fine. I'm sure he's just busy, he's working. But then when we were at my mom's birthday dinner, the 23rd, I got the phone call, and I didn't understand the voice on the phone. I was like, is it his mom? Is it his dad? Who's calling me? He had lit himself on fire and had to be airlifted to a hospital. And so I still, even in that moment, is he okay? What's happening? And this is 3.5, 4-hour drive. And my kids are running around, so they were only 3 and 6 at the time. Birthday parties, about to do Christmas. And so I had to be on the phone with the doctors when they were telling me, do you want us to do life-saving measures? Or do you want us to make him comfortable? I'm like, what kind of decision is that? This is not making sense. They said best case scenario, he could be on life support in a nursing home in a facility. And I said, how am I supposed to make this decision? And I looked up in the sky and I saw a cross. The lights kind of just made a cross in the sky. And I said, God, you need to help me with this. I said, please just make him comfortable. I'm on my way. So I said to the kids, Dad's been in an accident. And I'm just gonna go make sure he's okay, but I'll be back for Christmas morning. Because at this point it was almost Christmas Eve. So I went in a car with my dad and my brother-in-law, and I laid down in the back seat. And I heard God say, Abby, you need to forgive him. And I'm like, what? He goes, you need to wake up now and forgive him. So I sat up. And in my own way, I'm like, of course I forgive him. And as soon as I said that, the phone rang. And they told me he had passed.
Most people, in order to survive something like that, need community, and they need trauma-informed community, a community that will come around them and realize that what you're dealing with now is beyond the usual. You're not just complaining.
I listened to other people and them telling me that my kid should never know what happened, and they didn't even go to his celebration of life or his service because we did talk about it being a suicide. So I was more listening to other people and thinking about, what could be or what should be than really spending that time with God and seeking that. So there are a lot of regrets there.
You've had a severe loss, you've had a severe disappointment, a severe trauma, or whatever the case happens to be, and you need more support than you can provide for yourself. So I would say community is a big part of people surviving great loss and great trauma.
So over the years, they knew that he had bipolar and that God took the breath of life, just like he gives the breath of life. But I believe that they thought in their own way over the years that maybe it was like a heart attack. I'm willing to just pour this out because I want to believe that others out there might be holding on to the same type of grief and unforgiveness. I made a lot of mistakes. I can't change what's happened. But when my kids did finally hear and find out, it's because my son found the death certificate and called his sister to tell her. And so I had to then just tell them all the truth. And that was just a few years before Kaylee died.
Whether or not a parent should disclose the entirety of the death of a loved one, of the reason for the death of the loved one, is a really nuanced question. But I would say you can give the child the truth, but a child version of it. So you may not want to give all the details. You may want to gradually disclose the details as the child grows and is able to cognitively understand the details. But you need to also not lie to the child. And if you say, oh, something else happened, then whatever tragedy occurred, you're effectively lying, and then the child won't be able to trust you. So you have to walk this fine line of being honest with the child and at the same time not overwhelming them with too much information.
Obviously, it's not a one-to-one kind of thing to where if this happens to you, then for sure you will be this way. But no matter what, we all have a sort of reservoir of pain and traumatic experiences that have happened to us. Some of us, it's more intense than others. But either way, we're going to navigate life in a way that tries to protect us from that pain.
I definitely think they were upset with me for holding the secret, but then they were upset with him. Why were we not good enough? Especially Kaylee struggled with them. Like, why wasn't I good enough? Why couldn't I make you happy? Why, did you choose to do this instead of be here for us? And so she actually said those things.
And especially if we have those traumatic things happen to us, when we're not in an environment where people can really help us navigate it well, then we can develop some really unhealthy behaviors as a way to try to soothe and avoid that pain happening again, which can really lead to an adult life where we're kind of disintegrated from our sort of natural, whole, healthy self, and we're just kind of chasing a high or chasing some sort of experience rather than being able to really be present and experience safety, love, and connection.
So looking back at her life and happy-go-lucky until 6, and then the sadness you'll see in pictures. She had her own traumas that we didn't know. She turned to relationships with older men and feeling she wanted to find her identity and her worth in that. So all the things that we say could happen, I feel could have been avoided if we had addressed it and just been honest from the start. And so that's when I now realized that she started smoking marijuana, trying a Percocet pill, because that's what, a lot of these kids have a lot of money at the high school that she went to as well. And so it could happen to anybody. It's truly anybody who bleeds red on the inside can be impacted by this.
So addiction is a very insidious disease, and there's really no rhyme or reason. But when it happens and the individual is living in their addiction, it's delicate. And the only way to break that pattern is to, one, you have to acknowledge that there's a problem. The whole disease is based on lies.
You have everything from oxycodone, Percocets. Those are the pills. That's what happened to my daughter, is the Percocets. That you have dealers and people out there that are intentionally pressing pills to make them look like legitimate oxycodone or Percocets that is pure fentanyl, and they don't know.
You lie to yourself thinking that you're managing. And the whole time, the addiction is craving more alcohol or opiates or marijuana. There's so many out there that do. They give a dopamine hit and they put you in a place where you're in sort of a protective bubble, but you can't feel the good and you can't feel the bad. It's just a shade of yourself. And the person doesn't realize it, but they become less and less engaged.
So what I learned later, getting into my daughter's phone, which had been locked, even the police couldn't get in it. And then all of a sudden the code, we tried a code and got in on the first attempt. And being able to see all this stuff and these pictures, and what I did see, which was comforting to me, she had Bible verses and scripture. So she was seeking God, just like I believe Rich was in those final moments. But seeing that and just what these kids got into, and seeing the text messages of who she was messaging, they were saying they no longer had the Percocets, but they have this powder. And so in an instant, if somebody's thinking, oh, well, I guess I'll just use a little bit of that, and they don't really know what it is, or they think it won't happen to them, and then it does.
At some point in time, everyone finds a way to outsource their emotions, whether it be through drug abuse, alcoholism, sex addiction, shopping, gambling, something to numb the pain. They are outsourcing their emotion to something else instead of facing it.
Hearing that it was a fentanyl overdose, and I have the report, but it was basically so much that she had in her system that the medical examiner said that she would have gone to sleep and just woke up with Jesus, that there was no pain, she didn't throw up, all the things that you would think that could happen with an overdose. There was no choking. Her bodily organs were in perfect condition. So whatever she took that she thought, because she had been clean for 30 days, she had just got out of rehab. Whatever that she got her hands on and took, thinking, oh, I'll just take, this, that was enough, a tiny little bit that put her to sleep.
There's a scripture that says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, lean not to your own understanding, all of your ways acknowledge him, he'll direct your path. Your emotions live in the seat of your heart. So which means it is almost impossible for you to trust the Lord until you do what? Come one-to-one with your true emotion. Your ability to be willing, I'm not saying you fix yourself, but to stand in the paint and stand in the mud of what you've gone through and to give yourself that grace and space to process gives you the strength to not only trust in the Lord, but to know what is next for you. To know that you do have the authority to live in this place of peace and hope and joy. That is what can define your life. But it's not until you are willing to acknowledge what emotion is there. It is very common for people to avoid. Very common for them to say, I'm not going there. I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry. I don't want to do that.
All those traumas, she was strong. But I think in the end, she just didn't want to feel that anymore. And I wish I would have been able to help her more.
to honor those who have passed, whether it be by suicide, overdose. It's very important to memorialize that, to have the ability to say your goodbyes. And there are so many different cultures and religions that do it in very unique ways. But the initial shock of the death can be so violent, so disruptive, that staying busy and preparing the funeral and making all the arrangements and having friends and loved ones come to the house and come to the service and support you and tell stories about your loved one. It fills those who are left behind with a chance to have a breather before they go home and it's really quiet. And that's when the real work begins.
Hope is huge when it comes to healing, because the journey of healing is often sorting through our internal worlds and the different pieces of us. Yes, it's going to storm and it's going to get really messy, but if we can latch onto some semblance of hope, that can be enough stability to ride out the storm until it ends and we can get through the other side.
If I knew then what I know now, right, what would I do differently? And that's why I have to believe and just trust that God is going to use her story, what I've been through, my medical and my mental health training, if I could share just with families before they go through that. Like what I would have seen, the sleeping extra, her nose a little red, not really explain that it's just a cold, like all the things that I wish I would have seen but I couldn't see because I was so close to it. So those are the triggers. Like looking back, of course, that would have been a trigger for her to use to take something just to take the edge off. She was just in a horrible accident and blamed for it, and it wasn't her fault. Hindsight. So I guess just recognizing that it could happen to any of us, having those open conversations with our kids, not feeling like, oh, well, that's not going to happen to our family, not being so busy that we miss it, but really sitting with them and helping them see that their value and worth of who they are. In faith, I couldn't do this without my faith, recognizing that we need to look to the source in order to be able to get through any of this. And finding faith-based mental health professionals that really do care, that aren't just going to give a diagnosis, that aren't going to prescribe a medication, that aren't going to send them away somewhere. Like all of those things is not what that child needs, because God has placed those kids in a family for a purpose, and they have all the tools that they need if they would rely on Him. That's what I would say.